In 2025, SB19 didn't simply rise on the charts, they forced the global music industry to rethink how success is measured. Away from the spotlight, conversations were happening among Billboard staff, label planners, and data analysts, all circling the same puzzle. How did a Filipino group, operating without Western industry machinery, outperform artists backed by massive promotional budgets? This outcome wasn't accidental. It wasn't driven purely by fandom energy, and it wasn't the result of favorable algorithms. According to an industry source inside Billboard, SB19's momentum exposed a reality the business rarely acknowledges, one that becomes impossible to ignore once it's seen. For years, SB19 existed at the margins of Western awareness. Their names surfaced occasionally in shares, mentions, or isolated chart appearances, but they were quietly categorized as peripheral, international, niche, easy to overlook. That classification collapsed in 2025, not because of a single viral moment, but because internal performance data began contradicting long-held assumptions. What caught analysts' attention wasn't surface popularity, but behavior patterns most audiences never notice. SB19 showed unusually high track completion rates, repeated listens that didn't fade after release week, and sustained engagement rather than short-lived spikes. Their audience wasn't skimming, it was staying. Inside Billboard's internal analytics systems, SB19 began appearing in projections typically dominated by acts with major U.S. label support. These weren't public-facing charts, but private forecasting tools used to evaluate touring viability, revenue stability, and long-term audience loyalty. Again and again, their data appeared alongside a rare internal designation: consistency without distortion. Public charts capture volume. Internal analytics reveal endurance. SB19 moved from one category to the other without spectacle, quietly, then unmistakably. That was the inflection point. The industry stopped asking who they were and started asking how this scale of impact was achieved without the usual infrastructure. Billboard didn't simply acknowledge SB19's presence, it adjusted the framework used to evaluate them. Labeling SB19 as an overnight success isn't just wrong, it oversimplifies history to the point of distortion. That narrative exists because Western coverage often defines a beginning as the moment it starts paying attention. Everything that happens before that moment is treated as irrelevant, even when it's the very foundation of what follows. What surfaced in 2025 was not a sudden breakthrough, but the accumulated weight of nearly 10 years of disciplined growth. Long before visibility arrived, SB19 was building technical skill, refining creative control, and experimenting with sound and structure in ways most pop acts never have the time or autonomy to attempt. While others were assembled quickly to meet demand, SB19 was developed deliberately, ability before image, substance before reach. Industry observers inside Billboard noted how unusual this progression was. There were no forced accelerations driven by excessive marketing spend, no abrupt reinventions designed to chase charts. Instead, the data showed continuity, music evolving naturally, performances tightening over time, and identity becoming clearer with each release. It wasn't flashy, but it was unmistakable in longitudinal metrics.
Most pop careers are designed for speed, rapid exposure, fast returns, and early burnout. SB19 followed a different model. They were built with depth, not just as performers, but as artists with real agency over their work, their narrative, and their trajectory. That distinction doesn't trend quickly, but it lasts. By 2025, what caught Billboard's attention wasn't the speed of SB19's ascent, it was the fact that they had been rising steadily for years without collapse. That distinction separates momentary buzz from something far rarer, a sustainable career. Around that time, raw streaming totals quietly lost their status as the ultimate bragging metric. Internally, Billboard analysts had already begun recalibrating how success was measured. Passive plays were de-emphasized, while a far more revealing signal was elevated: engagement depth. Starting a song is easy. Staying through it isn't. Coming back again and again is even harder. This is where SB19 disrupted the model. Their performance data showed exceptionally high completion rates, indicating listeners weren't sampling tracks, they were finishing them. Replay behavior wasn't explosive and short-lived, it was stable and recurring. Songs didn't spike for a week and vanish from attention, they lingered. Save rates climbed steadily, resembling patterns typically associated with established legacy acts rather than contemporary pop releases. Even comment activity refused to decay, staying active well beyond launch windows, evidence of dialogue, not drive-by attention. When analysts compared SB19's engagement profile against globally marketed acts with significantly larger budgets, the contrast was striking. Some artists generated massive stream counts but shallow follow-through. SB19, by comparison, showed fewer passive impressions but far stronger behavioral commitment. Their audience didn't just listen, they invested time, interpretation, and advocacy. One insider distilled the difference with brutal clarity. They're not consuming the music, they're involved in it. That distinction changes everything. Involvement signals belief, and belief is the strongest predictor of longevity the industry has. For fans, this realization reframed their role entirely. Every replay, save, and comment wasn't just enthusiasm, it was measurable influence. Data doesn't respond to hype, it responds to behavior. SB19 didn't exploit the system. Their audience became a structural part of it. Once SB19's performance data crossed the threshold of undeniability, Western labels responded instinctively. They attempted replication. New acts were rolled out with carefully engineered authenticity. Social teams doubled in size. Intimacy was scripted. Vulnerability was scheduled. Behind-the-scenes access was scaled like a product. None of it produced the same effect. Because SB19 was never a system that could be copied. Capital can magnify exposure, but it cannot fabricate conviction. Algorithms don't reward effort, they reward behavior. And audiences, especially by 2025, had grown acutely sensitive to manufactured sincerity. Years of hyper-optimized releases had left listeners fatigued, overstimulated, undermoved. SB19 entered that environment as a contradiction, visibly human, imperfect in ways that felt real, and deeply invested in their own evolution.
What labels couldn't reproduce was autonomy. SB19 dictated their sound, their pacing, and their message. They didn't chase trends after they peaked. They adjusted in dialogue with their audience as it evolved. That two-way relationship formed a feedback loop most acts never achieve. Trust accumulated slowly, but once established, it became structural. Inside Billboard's analytical circles, a term began circulating that rarely attaches to pop groups: anti-fragile. Pressure didn't fracture SB19's momentum, it reinforced it. Each challenge intensified loyalty instead of thinning it. Resistance didn't stall growth, it refined it. The industry learned a familiar lesson the hard way. Visuals can be mimicked, rollout strategies can be borrowed, even discipline can be outsourced, but belief cannot be simulated. Belief is earned, or it doesn't exist at all. That's why SB19 resisted duplication. Their global breakthrough in 2025 also dismantled another long-standing assumption, that international success requires cultural erasure. While many non-English acts dilute identity to chase accessibility, SB19 achieved something far more durable: emotional fluency without compromise. Their music communicated ambition, conflict, and perseverance in ways that resonated instinctively, not linguistically. Billboard analysts detected a telling pattern. Language posed no barrier to engagement. Completion rates remained high across non-Filipino-speaking regions. Replay behavior held steady.
Instead of disengaging, global listeners leaned in, learning lyrics, exchanging interpretations, and amplifying the group's cultural specificity rather than flattening it. The comparison to early K-pop globalization surfaced often, with a crucial distinction. SB19 didn't export identity as a product. Their identity was recognized as value. Filipino culture functioned not as a niche marker, but as a differentiator, something the global market adjusted to rather than resisted. One insider summarized it succinctly: "They didn't adapt to the market recalibrated around them." In simple terms, the global audience adapted to the music, not the reverse. That distinction is crucial. It produced commitment rather than fleeting interest. SB19 didn't merely expand beyond borders, they reframed how cultural identity and global accessibility can coexist in today's music ecosystem. Their success demonstrated to Billboard and the wider industry that authenticity, when expressed without compromise, is not a limitation, it is leverage. By 2025, live performance data had become just as influential as streaming analytics. For Billboard insiders, concerts were no longer viewed as promotional extras, they functioned as live behavioral case studies. SB19's shows consistently exceeded expectations, transforming casual observers into deeply engaged supporters. Unlike digital metrics, live performance data captured immediate emotional response, crowd cohesion, energy transfer, and the ripple effects that followed once audiences went back online. Industry veterans attending SB19 concerts began quietly re-evaluating long-held assumptions. Internal reports pointed to unusually high levels of audience participation, coordinated chants without prompting, spontaneous viral content generated during performances, and social engagement spikes occurring minutes, not days, after shows ended. More importantly, conversion indicators told a clear story. Ticket demand increased, merchandise sales outpaced forecasts, and streaming activity surged post-performance. These weren't symbolic wins, they were measurable growth events. One insight stood out across multiple reports. SB19's live impact translated directly into digital momentum. Fans didn't passively attend, they activated. Each concert produced hundreds, sometimes thousands of independent amplifiers sharing clips, reactions, and commentary without coordination or incentive. One Billboard insider summarized it succinctly: "They don't warm audiences up, they flip them." This fusion of stage authority, technical discipline, and audience integration created a self-reinforcing loop rarely seen in modern pop. Where many Western acts see live metrics plateau after initial exposure, SB19's performances expanded their market footprint with each appearance. For Billboard, the conclusion was unavoidable. An act that commands a room with authenticity holds a form of influence no algorithm, trend cycle, or marketing budget can replicate.
2025 wasn't just another chapter for SB19, it was a convergence of timing, trust, and transformation. The global music industry was undergoing a quiet reset. Post-pandemic audiences had grown wary of overproduced hype, increasingly resistant to manufactured virality, and far more responsive to authenticity that could feel rather than be sold. At the same time, algorithms were evolving. Passive clicks mattered less, sustained attention, repeat behavior, and genuine conversation began carrying real weight. Within Billboard's internal analysis, one pattern stood out. SB19 had been accumulating depth long before global awareness caught up. While many acts depended on short-lived surges powered by aggressive marketing, SB19's rise followed a compounding curve. Their momentum wasn't triggered, it was earned. Years of creative control, disciplined production, and emotionally grounded performances had cultivated an audience that didn't just listen, but stayed. By the time the industry's priorities shifted, SB19 was already aligned with what the market had begun to value. When attention finally turned their way, the foundation was unshakable. The defining force behind SB19's 2025 breakthrough, however, extended beyond the music itself. It was ACE10.
Their fandom evolved into a decentralized network rather than a traditional fan base,